Welcome to On This Day in Tudor History with me, Claire Ridgway. Today I'm taking you back to the reign of King Henry VIII. For On This Day in Tudor History, the 4th of December 1514, merchant tailor and leading member of the Lollard community in London, Richard Hunne, died. Hunne had been arrested for heresy and imprisoned in Lollard's Tower at St Paul's on the 14th of October, following the discovery of a Wycliffite Bible at his home. His body was discovered hanging in his cell from a silk girdle. It was claimed that he'd committed suicide, but a coroner's jury ruled that the hanging had been faked and that Hunne had been murdered. Let me tell you a bit more about Hunne, his arrest and death. But first, let me explain what a Lollard was. A Lollard was a follower of the teachings of the 14th century theologian John Wycliffe. Wycliffe denied transubstantiation, that is to say the miracle of the Eucharist, emphasised the authority of Scripture over all else, and attacked the role of the Pope, regarding the office as having no scriptural basis and the Pope as the Antichrist. And now let me introduce you to Richard Hunne. Nothing is known of Hunne's early life, but he worked as a merchant tailor in the parish of St Margaret New Fish Street in London and was a wealthy man. His wife was the daughter of Thomas Vincent, a leading member of London's Lollards. In 1511, Hunne and his wife lost their 5-week-old son, Stephen, and the usual practice of the time was to give the local rector the baby's bearing sheet from the christening as a mortuary payment, and their local rector was Thomas Dryfield of St Mary's, Whitechapel. Hunne refused to do this, saying it was not due, and in 1512 the rector sued Hunne for the payment at the Archbishop of Canterbury's Court of Audience at Lambeth. Unsurprisingly, the court found in favour of the rector. Then, in December 1512, Hunne turned up at Vespers at St Mary's, only to find that Thomas Marshall, the priest, refused to go on with the service until he'd left, crying out, "Hunne, thou art accursed and standest accursed," meaning that Hunne was excommunicated. In January 1513, Hunne sued Marshall at the King's Bench for slander, pointing out that the priest's words had damaged his business and reputation. He also sued Marshall, Dryfield, and all those who'd been involved in Dryfield's case against him over the mortuary payment for Premunire. The case was adjourned, but then heresy proceedings began against Hunne. On the 14th of October 1513, a search was carried out on Hunne's home, and a Wycliffite Bible was found. Hunne was arrested and imprisoned at St Paul's Cathedral in the Lollards Tower. On the 2nd of December, Hunne was taken to Fulham and examined by Richard Fitzjames, Bishop of London. Martyrologist John Fox writes that he was questioned regarding 6 different issues: speaking out against the payment of tithes, saying that bishops and priests were the scribes and Pharisees that crucified Christ, saying that bishops and priests were teachers and preachers but not doers, and that they took all things but gave nothing, saying that he defended a woman named Joan Baker and her opinions, a woman who had abjured of many great heresies, and that he'd said that the Bishop of London and his officers have done open wrong to the said Joan Baker in punishing her for heresy, for her sayings and opinions be according to the laws of God, wherefore the bishop and his officers are more worthy to be punished for heresy than she is. He was also accused of keeping diverse English books prohibited and damned by the law, as the Apocalypse in English, Epistles and Gospels in English, Wycliffe's damnable works, and other books containing infinite errors, in the which he hath been long time accustomed to read, teach, and study daily. Following his examination, Hunne was sent back to the Lollards Tower, where, according to Fox, the bishop's summoner Charles Joseph was relieved of his custody and bell ringer John Spalding was put in charge. On the morning of this day in history, the 4th of December 1514, Hunne was discovered dead in his cell. FitzJames and his Chancellor, Dr. William Horsey, stated that Hunn had committed suicide, that he had hanged himself from a hook in the ceiling using his silk girdle. They then tried him posthumously for heresy, adding to the charges that he'd denied the miracle of the Eucharist and the veneration of saints. On the 20th of December 1514, Hunn's remains were burnt. However, a coroner's jury found that Hunn had been murdered due to there being signs of a struggle and Hunn being tortured. They ruled that he'd been throttled to death and then his body hanged to make it look like suicide. Dr. Horsey and Hunn's jailers, Charles Joseph and Spalding, were arrested, Joseph while trying to flee. Hunn's death caused such a scandal that King Henry VIII heard of it and ordered his council to look into it. The people of London were angry and were sympathetic to Hunn's family. So high was feeling in London that Bishop FitzJames appealed to Cardinal Wolsey to prevent his chancellor from being tried, concerned that he be found guilty, though he was as innocent as Abel. Horsey escaped trial, and John Foxe records that instead he was sent away from London to Exeter. And sadly, Hunn's property was not restored to his widow and children because he'd been found guilty of heresy. Richard Hunne's story is a sad one. Although he did hold beliefs that were deemed heretical then, his arrest and murder appear to have been more about the trouble he was causing for the clergy in London. If you're interested in reading more about Richard Hunne, including the sentence of the coroner's inquest into his death, I'll share a link to John Foxe's chapter on him in his Book of Martyrs, although you have to take into account that Foxe was not even born at the time and was viewing Hunne as a Protestant martyr. Tomorrow I'll be talking about the death of a young king from what appears to have been an ear infection. Do make sure you're subscribed, click just round about there, and that you've hit the bell so you don't miss that video. Also on this day in Tudor history, the 4th of December 1555, in Rome, papal sentence was passed on Thomas Cranmer, resulting in him being deprived of his archbishopric. Permission was also granted for his fate to be decided by the secular authorities. Thomas Cranmer went on to recant his Protestant faith on several occasions, but was still executed by being burnt at the stake. Why? Well, you can find out in last year's video. You'll find a link to that in the description. Thank you for joining me. Please give me a like if you've enjoyed this talk, and do feel free to leave a comment as well. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.